Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Terumos, Chapter 1, Halacha 1. This is part 8 of the Shir, and the ArtScroll we're on 8a1. And today we're really going to get into the idea of what is Terumos. Now, there's going to be a back and forth here. We're going to basically be exploring Rabbi Meir's opinion. And a lot of this conversation is going to get taken up in part 9 of the Shir with Rabbi Yochanan's view on what Rabbi Meir is saying. But right now, we're going to look at one of the ways to look at Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is basically going to be having a dialogue with Rabbi Yosei and also Rabbi Yehuda. And they're basically going to be trying to say, well, what are going to be the limits of Terumos? What exactly is Terumos? And we're going to say, well, wait a second. What's going to be the difference between Terumos and making a sacrifice, like going and making a consecration and, declaring something to be a sacrifice? So we're going to go through it, and we're going to see that there is a difference between the two, and it's going to be like dealing with coming up what is the difference, but using the minor, that's going to be the person who's underage, to try to suss out exactly what's going to be this difference. Now, in the end of this, what we're really going to see is we're going to see that the Terumos exists when you're coming and you're consecrating it, right? The Terumos always exists within this pile. So you're not really declaring something new. It's already there. You have to separate it out, but it's there. And when you're going and you're consecrating an animal to go, to be a sacrifice, or you're dedicating it to the temple, that's an entirely new consecration. That's an entirely new thing that didn't exist before. And that's ultimately going to be like the punchline of the difference between a consecration and going ahead and separating out Terumos. And again, we're going to be looking at this through the lens of the minor, the underage person, in order to see what this difference is. The Mishnah said regarding a minor who has not yet grown 2 hairs, that are going to be, by the way, the sign of the adulthood, that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that his truma is valid truma. Rabbi Yossi says that if a minor separates truma before he's reached the age of vows, his truma is not valid truma. But if he separates it after he's reached the age of vows, his truma is valid truma. Now, what are the age of vows? Well, that for a boy is going to be 12. For a girl, it's going to be 11. And there's this special category. Why? Because a boy who was already 12 years old already has a different level of understanding. He's already probably entered where he's growing some hair or whatever. And, and also, he's also in bar mitzvah training. So he has some guidance and he has some, some understanding. So this comes up in Nedarim. What happens now if a minor at this age comes and declares a vow? Again, all through chapter 1, we're dealing with, hey, is this person capable of thought and understanding in order to do this? And now we're looking at this age range here. So that's going to be the idea, right? Rabbi Yossi saying that if a minor separates truma before he's reached this age of vows, it's not valid. But within this time frame, it's going to be valid. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to be saying that a minor who has not yet grown 2 hairs, he's going to say that his truma is valid. Now, is there going to be much difference between them? We'll discover that. So the Gemara is going to look at the third opinion about the minor's truma separation. And there's a brisa that taught in the name of Rabbi Meir what this third separation would be. And the Gemara says his truma is never valid truma until he produces 2 pubic hairs that are a sign of adulthood. In other words, the Rosh is explaining this third view that, by the way, does dispute Rabbi Yehuda and also disputes Rabbi Yossi. And we know that Rabbi Meir is the Tana Kama of our Mishnah who lists that a minor of any age among the 5 people cannot separate out Truma. So Rabbi Kanievsky in his Beur explains it like this, that Rabbi Meir is stating that a minor's Truma separation is never valid Truma, to emphasize that even if the minor has reached the age of vows, his truma separation is invalid. And this, by the way, disputes Rabbi Yossi's position. Now, Shenis Eliyahu is going to, that's the Vilna Goan, he's going to be commenting that Rabbi Meir means to disqualify even someone who's reached the age of 13 but still lacks pubic hair. Now, the Gemara is going to look at Rabbi Meir's reasoning, and now the Gemara says that Rabbi Yudah said in the name of Rabbi Hillel, the verse stating regarding Truma, it says, and you shall bear no sin on his account when you separate its best from it. Now, this is in Numbers 18:32. The Torah is talking about the obligation on Levium to separate another tithe. What would that be? That's Trumas Meiser, from the portion of Meiser that they get. And it's saying that when the Levim go and select out the Trumas Meiser, they have to give from the best part that they got. And it's indicating that if somebody doesn't separate the best Truma, he bears a sin. Now, this, by the way, is also for Truma Gedola. And so this idea is sin, right? Sin is in here. So the question that comes up in this Gemara is, can someone separate Truma in the first place? In other words, someone who's liable for punishment for separating Truma improperly, can they separate Truma in the first place, right? So if they're too underage to make a sin, then maybe they can't also separate Truma, right? That's what this interpretation of the Torah is implying. And the Gemara continues, it says, but one who is not subject to bearing a sin for separating Truma improperly cannot separate out Truma in the first place. Why? Because a minor is not subject to bearing a sin. And therefore, it looks like he'd be exempt from any biblical punishment, and because he's included or excluded from separating out Trumos. Only the people who are able to do a sin, like people who are mentally cognizant and aware and not crazy, or limited by senses, like what we were covering before with being deaf and dumb, or also now the minor. But now we're seeing here the inverse, which is that, hey, they have to be able to be of age or whatever in order to qualify, and they have to be able to bear a sin. And otherwise, if they're not able to bear a sin, then they're exempt. And by the way, they're exempt on a biblical level. Now, this, according to Rosh Cirilio, that's my son playing in the background, is basically saying that only an adult is subject to punishment for violation of a mitzvah. But again, where are we going to draw the line for who is an adult? So the Gemara is going to look at Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara says that they may counter that there's a case of the idol worshiper who is not subject to bearing a sin for failing to separate out Truma, yet he can separate out Truma from his own produce. In other words, we see that even someone who does not bear sin for violating Truma law is fit still to separate out Truma. So the question is, does it follow that the minor's exemption from bearing a sin cannot be grounds for excluding him from Truma separation? So the Mishnah is stating in chapter 3, Halacha 5 of Terumos, that an idol worshiper can separate out Truma from his produce that he grew in the field. Now, even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is going to dispute the Tana Kama, and he's going to agree that the idol worshiper can separate out Truma, but he's going to say only regard to the 1/5 penalty, claiming that it does not apply to that Truma. And the Rosh Cirilio explains that although the idol worshiper can separate Truma from his own produce, he's not obligated to do it. And so the nuance here is that he is not liable for any punishment, even if he entirely fails to tithe it and take out Truma in the first place. So also, by the way, he's also not liable if he separates out an inferior part of the produce as Truma. Now, we just saw this with what Rabbi Yudah is quoting. Rabbi Yudah is saying that the Torah is pointing out when you separate its best from it. Now, it also means that the Truma needs the best from it. Now, this is pointing out that the idol worshiper doesn't need to separate out the best from his Truma. He's not bound by these rules. Now, the Gemara is going to be saying that Rabbi Meir's previous source seems to be deflected, and the Gemara provides another source for what exactly is Rabbi Meir's opinion. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Abba Bar Kana said in the name of the rabbis that the verse states, "And your truma shall be reckoned to you." This, by the way, is going to be in Numbers 18:27. The whole verse reads, where it says in the Torah, "And your truma shall be reckoned to you like the grain from the threshing floor and like the wine from the winepress." Now, this verse, by the way, is talking about Trumas Meiser, and it's teaching that it has the same laws as Truma Gedola. In other words, grain from the threshing floor, wine from the winepress. But the Gemara is deriving the laws of Truma Gedola from here as well. And basically, everything that is going to be called Truma is going to be linked together. So you have Trumas Meiser, and you have Trumas Gedola, and that's basically being linked together between here and there with the same rules. Now, the Gemara is going to basically be teaching that Truma has to be designated with thought or intention. We covered this in an earlier shiur on chapter 1, Halacha 1 here. And the Gemara continues, says, "It stands to reason that one about whom the term thought is written, in other words, a person who has thought has legal impact, that they can separate out Truma," says this Gemara. Whereas one about whom the term thought is not written, a person, in other words, who does not have legal impact, cannot separate out Truma. Now, we know that a minor is incapable of legally significant thought, and therefore they are not eligible to separate out Truma. Now, the Pnei Moshe points out that a minor is considered to have only legally significant action, but not legally significant thought. And we covered this when we were talking about separating out Trumos in earlier shiurim of chapter 1, Halacha 1, and that, what happens if, the minor goes ahead or the deranged person goes ahead to try to affect hechsher, right? And they put the figs on top of the roof to try to dry. Well, that's going to be a legally significant action, but it's not going to be something that demonstrates intention or thought. So the Gemara is going to continue with that, and basically the whole thing says that they're going to counter that there's a case of the idol worshiper whom thought is not written, and it says yet he can separate out truma from his own produce. And Rabbi Hoshaya taught a brisa as follows. It says that idol worshippers do not have the power to create a legal impact in Torah law through thought. In other words, that since they can nevertheless separate truma, we can see that they have legally significant thought, but it's not a prerequisite for separating out truma. So the idea is that the Gemara is going to try to mean that the idol worshippers can't affect any legal process through thought alone, and the Gemara is going to deflect this argument and come back to Rabbi Meir's proof. And it says there in the brisa that Rabbi Hoshai is teaching, we're referring specifically to making food susceptible to tuma contamination, in other words, the laws of hechsher. And we looked earlier in part 1 of this shiur in Terumos 1:1 that food is not susceptible to tuma unless it becomes wet, and the wetting of it must also be where the owner's happy with that. And then the brisa is teaching that an idol worshiper is unable to render food susceptible to tuma through his satisfaction with it becoming wet. Now, the idea is that in this context, that the idol worshiper lacks thought, and that lacks a legal impact. Why? Because the idol worshiper can't become tamei according to biblical law, and so his thought can't make something susceptible to tuma, because basically the Torah gave significance with regards to things of tuma to the Jews, and only the thoughts about somebody who's susceptible to those laws can affect things that are going to be with tamei and tahor and the laws of tahara. Since these laws don't apply to non-Jews, their thoughts don't have the legal impact regarding it. Now, the Rosh Hashanah says that there is a legal source for Rabbi Hoshaya's ruling. That verse basically talks about where the law of hechsher is derived. This, by the way, is in Vayikra 11:38, which says that, and if water is placed upon seed with the owner's satisfaction, and the seed then touches the source of Tuma is tamei to you, and this phrase to you refers specifically to Jews. It excludes, by the way, non-Jews. Why? Because it says that they can't affect hechsher through satisfaction with wetting something. And basically, the idea, says the Gemara, is, but here we're talking about truma. We're not talking about hechsher, right? And so the question is then, can a minor, which, does not have the capacity for thought, have any legal impact so that he would be excluded, maybe from separating out truma altogether? So the Rosh Aurelio says, since some of the laws of truma are going to apply to an idol worshiper, he's able to separate truma from his own produce. His thought has legal significance regarding truma separation. So it seems, says Rosh Aurelio, that the idol worshiper, like the Jew, can designate truma, even though he's merely intending for a certain portion to become consecrated as truma without physically separating it. Now, Rabbi Meir is going to basically be excluding a minor because he's going to say that he doesn't have the capacity for thought, whereas the idol worshiper is fit to separate truma because his thought is legally significant with the context of truma separation. In other words, Rabbi Meir says that he can separate out truma, that maybe it lacks a lot of the qualities that the truma of a Jew has, but he can still do it. And Rabbi Meir is saying that, no, there's something specific here about the minor, that the minor can't do it, but the idol worshiper can. And, he's basically saying that the minor doesn't have the capacity for thought. And so again, now we're pulling apart this difference that, implicit within the truma, something different's going on here. And Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Meir are going to differ as to whether a minor who reaches the age of vows can separate out truma. Now, Rabbi Yosei is effectively going to be coming along and saying that the minor who reaches the age of vows can separate out truma because the truma separation is effectively a vow. And that's a big departure from what Rabbi Meir is saying. Rabbi Meir is saying that there's a context for thought and legally significant action and thought. Rabbi Yosei is saying that no, that once you've reached the age of vows, truma separation is basically just a vow, and so all you've done is make a vow, and that's why the truma separation is going to be valid once you hit the age of the vows. So Rabbi Acha cites Rabbi Chanina, who says in the name of Rav Kana, again, to try to explain the position of what Rabbi Meir is, and says, according to the one, that's Rabbi Meir, who says that a minor cannot separate truma until he produces 2 pubic hairs and becomes adult, he also cannot consecrate an animal as an offering. Now, consecrating something to hektish, that's a form of a neder. Now, in Nida 45b, there's a Mishnah over there. It's teaching that a minor who has reached the age of vows can consecrate objects to hektish. So somebody might think that even Rabbi Meir agrees with that ruling, and he maintains that the scriptural exclusion invalidating a minor from separating out truma refers specifically to truma and not to hektish. In other words, Rav Kana is informing us that Rabbi Meir compares the laws of truma and hektish and invalidates the minor's hektish consecration. So according to, as explained by Rabbi Kanievsky in his Beur, according to Rav Kana, Rabbi Meir is holding that under biblical law, a minor also cannot make a neder, and the rule that once a minor has reached the age of vows, his neder is valid, but that's just going to be a rabbinic enactment. And again, this is going to be how Rav Kana is trying to explain it. So Rav Kana is basically trying to explain Rabbi Meir's position by saying that the minor cannot consecrate an offering. Also, this is going to be referring to biblical law. And Rav Kana would agree, though, that by rabbinic law, a minor who does reach the age of vows can consecrate an offering. And so we're seeing here that when we compare this to Rabbi Yosei is basically saying that designating truma is just like making a neder, so that a 12-year-old boy or an 11-year-old girl, he's allowed to make a neder, And so too, he could designate truma. But what we're seeing with Rabbi Meir is saying that, from scripture, only a full adult is able to separate truma and designate it. Now, the Gemara is going to ask a question. Why does Rav Kana not also say the opposite? In other words, saying, according to the one, this is going to be Rabbi Yosei, who says that a minor can separate truma, he can also consecrate the animal as an offering. In other words, Pnei Moshe is pointing out that this converse rule is implied in Rav Kana's statement. And, Rav Kana is basically implying that according to the one who says that a minor can separate out truma, he can also consecrate hekdesh. And so the Gemara is wondering out, why didn't Rav Kana not follow the usual practice of spelling out both sides of the assertion? And so he's only putting out Rabbi Meir's assertion. He's not putting out Rabbi Yossi's assertion. And the Gemara is going to answer why he's not putting out Rabbi Yossi's assertion. The Gemara says, it is because of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that Rav Kana does not say the converse rule. Because Rav Yehuda says in our Mishnah that even a minor who has not reached the age of vows can separate out truma. Yet he agrees that such a minor cannot consecrate an animal as an offering. So this is where the wrinkle comes in, right? The Mara Fulda explains this like this, that it's only regard to truma separation that Rabbi Yehuda validates the act of an intelligent minor who's not yet reached the age of vows. And with respect to hekdesh, Rabbi Yehuda concedes that a minor's consecration is invalid until he has reached the age of vows. In other words, he's saying that there's something different about the consecration. And again, we're going to be getting to this idea that, the tevel or the truma always exists in this grain pile, but the hekdesh is a new declaration. So how can a minor who's not at the age of vows come and create something new? In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is basically going to be implying that, or saying that the truma is always there. He's just taking it out. He didn't create anything new. He just put it into a new pile. And so he's going to be saying that it's going to be valid. But he's going to be saying that this and that, truma and hekdesh, are not the same. Because when you're doing a hekdesh consecration to the temple for an offering or something like that, then you've created something new, and a minor can't do it, doesn't have the understanding to do it. So the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Yehuda says in our Mishnah that even a minor who has not reached the age of vows can separate out truma, and he agrees that a minor cannot consecrate an animal as an offering. So Rabbi Yehuda is distinguishing in this regard between separating out truma and consecrating offerings, and Rav Kana couldn't state that the one who holds that a minor can separate out truma also holds that he can consecrate an animal as an offering. Why? Because the statement is not true according to Rabbi Yehuda. That statement's true according to Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda is a third opinion. He has a different opinion. So according to Rabbi Yossi, it is correct that any minor who can separate out truma once he's reached the age of vows can also consecrate an animal as an offering. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not true, because he's creating something that has an entirely new sanctity that previously didn't exist. Now, we're going to get into part 9 of this year. We're going to end on 8A2 in the art scroll. We're going to get into looking at this in another way with Rabbi Yochanan about this debate between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi. And ultimately, what's going to be coming in is something that connects us back to Masechet Demai. And, one of the things that we have to consider is that, this tevel might only be tevel on a D'Rabbanan level. It might not be tevel on a D'Oraita level. And so we're going to get into issues linking back to Masechet Demai in part 9 of this year. Have a great day.